welcome back to Globewise Entertainment. Today, we're diving deep into cinema history to uncover the 14 most bold movies made before the 1930s, films that dared to shock audiences, challenge traditions, and push the boundaries of storytelling long before Hollywood's golden age. From groundbreaking visuals to daring themes, these classics proved that movies have always been more than just entertainment. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our community of film lovers. And don't forget, tell us in the comments, which of these bold classics stands out the most to you? 1. The Chic, 1915. In the golden age of silent cinema, when Hollywood was still finding its voice, one film shocked audiences with its daring themes of desire, betrayal, and power. That film was The Chic, 1915, directed by Cecil B. DeMille. At its center is Edith Hardy, a wealthy but reckless socialite who spends money as if it were endless. When her world begins to crumble under financial ruin, she makes a desperate pact with Häxan Tori, a powerful Burmese ivory merchant. In exchange for saving her from scandal, Edith offers something far more dangerous than money, herself. What unfolds is a story of obsession and control. Tori brands Edith's shoulder with his family seal, marking her as his possession in one of the most shocking moments ever captured in silent cinema. When Edith tries to escape, the film erupts into violence, scandal, and courtroom drama, daringly confronting race, gender, and power dynamics in a way that 1915 audiences had never seen before. The film was controversial, not only for its raw depiction of female vulnerability and interracial desire but also because it openly challenged the social norms of its time. In fact, it was so bold that DeMille had to alter parts of the film for later re-releases to calm the outrage. Yet, despite the backlash, The Chic became a landmark film, revolutionary in its storytelling, lighting techniques, and fearless exploration of taboo subjects. It's no wonder this silent-era drama remains remembered today as one of the most daring films made before the 1930s. 2. Nosferatu, 1922. Long before Dracula became a Hollywood legend, German director F.W. Murnau dared to bring Bram Stoker's vampire tale to life in a way no one had ever seen before. But here's the twist: he didn't actually have the rights to Stoker's novel. So instead of Dracula, audiences met Count Orlok, a grotesque and haunting figure with long clawed fingers, hollow eyes, and a rat-like appearance. This was 1922, a time when cinema itself was still finding its voice. Yet Nosferatu wasn't just bold, it was terrifying. Its shadow-filled sets, eerie atmosphere, and bone-chilling scenes of Orlok rising from his coffin were unlike anything moviegoers had ever witnessed. In fact, many historians call it the first true horror film. The movie's boldness wasn't just in its visuals. It broke taboos by portraying death, plague, and the supernatural at a time when audiences were still used to light-hearted silent comedies and melodramas. The film was so disturbing that some theaters reportedly had viewers fainting during screenings. But the controversy didn't stop there. Bram Stoker's widow sued the filmmakers for copyright infringement, demanding every single copy of Nosferatu be destroyed. Amazingly, one print survived, allowing the film to become the cult classic we know today. Today, Nosferatu is remembered not only as one of the boldest movies before the 1930s, but as the foundation of vampire cinema. Without Count Orlok, there might never have been Bela Lugosi's Dracula, Christopher Lee's Hammer films, or even modern franchises like Twilight. From legal battles to its chilling imagery, Nosferatu proved that cinema could push boundaries, frighten audiences, and change movie history forever. 3. Intolerance, 1916. When cinema was still in its infancy, one film towered above them all: D.W. Griffith's Intolerance, 1916. Created as a direct response to the backlash Griffith faced after The Birth of a Nation, this ambitious epic was unlike anything audiences had ever seen before. Instead of playing it safe, Griffith dared to explore 4 different stories across 2,500 years of history, all linked by the universal theme of human intolerance. The film boldly cut between Babylon in its full splendor with massive sets and colossal battle scenes, the life and crucifixion of Jesus, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 16th century France, and a modern-day story of love and injustice in America. At the time, no one had attempted storytelling on this scale. Griffith used sweeping camera movements, cross-cutting techniques, and set pieces so gigantic that Hollywood wouldn't see their equal for decades. The set of ancient Babylon alone stood over 300 feet tall, filled with thousands of extras, a vision of spectacle that pushed silent cinema beyond its limits. But beyond the grandeur, what made Intolerance so bold was its message. At a time when films were often just entertainment, Griffith tackled themes of religious persecution, social injustice, and human cruelty, subjects so daring that critics called it both confusing and revolutionary. Though the movie wasn't a box office hit at first, history has crowned it one of the most important films ever made. Its influence can be seen in everything from Ben-Hur to modern epics like The Lord of the Rings. In the end, Intolerance wasn't just a movie, it was Griffith's defiant statement that cinema could be both art and a mirror to humanity's darkest flaws. And over a century later, it still stands as one of the boldest films ever made before the 1930s. 4. Häxan, 1922. In 1922, long before horror cinema had its own identity, Danish filmmaker Benjamin Christensen created a film so daring, so unsettling, that it blurred the lines between documentary, horror, and forbidden art. That film was Häxan, also known as Witchcraft Through the Ages. At its core, Häxan wasn't just a movie, it was an exploration of human fear. Christensen combined historical research with shocking dramatizations, recreating the medieval witch trials in graphic detail. The film exposed how superstition, fear of women, and unchecked religious authority led to centuries of brutality. But here's where Häxan broke every cinematic rule of its time. It dared to show nudity, demonic rituals, and torture, decades before Hollywood would even allow a kiss longer than a few seconds. It featured grotesque demons and the devil himself, complete with horns, wings, and a sinister grin. Christensen even played Satan on screen, delivering one of silent cinema's most terrifying performances. It boldly suggested that what people once called witchcraft was, in reality, misunderstood mental illness, an idea shockingly progressive for the 1920s. Audiences weren't ready. Many countries banned the film outright for indecency, while others cut entire scenes. Critics labeled it blasphemous, yet artists and intellectuals praised it as visionary. Over time, it gained a cult following, later inspiring horror filmmakers, surrealists, and even heavy metal aesthetics. Today, Häxan is celebrated as one of the boldest films ever made, a cinematic time capsule that challenged censorship, religion, and social taboos, all in 1922. Watching it now feels like peering into a nightmare drawn straight from the medieval imagination, yet it also reminds us of the dangers of fear-driven societies. 5. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, 1920. When it comes to bold and groundbreaking cinema before the 1930s, few films left as deep an impression as The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Released in 1920 Germany, at a time when the world was still reeling from World War I, this movie wasn't just a film, it was a psychological nightmare projected on screen. Directed by Robert Wiene, it told the story of a mysterious hypnotist, Dr. Caligari, who uses a sleepwalker named Cesare to commit murders. But what truly shocked audiences wasn't just the eerie tale, it was the way the story was told. Instead of realistic sets, the filmmakers used twisted, distorted, and jagged backdrops, buildings leaning at impossible angles, shadows painted directly on walls, staircases that bent unnaturally. It looked less like real life and more like stepping into someone's nightmare or hallucination. For audiences of 1920, this was something completely unheard of. What made it even bolder was its psychological twist ending, which forced viewers to question what was real and what was imagined. This kind of storytelling paved the way for the horror and thriller genres we know today. From Alfred Hitchcock to modern psychological thrillers, echoes of Caligari can still be seen. At the time, critics and audiences were divided. Some were disturbed and confused, while others praised it as a work of genius. But over time, it became known as the first true horror film and a cornerstone of German Expressionism, a movement that forever changed cinema. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari wasn't just a movie, it was a cinematic rebellion. At a time when most films were simple romances or adventure tales, Caligari dared to ask, what if film could show us the darkest corners of the human mind? This makes it perfect for your most bold movies made before the 1930s video, since it not only shocked early audiences but also laid the foundation for horror, thrillers, and even modern psychological cinema. 6. Broken Blossoms, 1919. D.W. Griffith, one of early Hollywood's most controversial yet pioneering filmmakers, shocked audiences in 1919 with Broken Blossoms, a film that dared to tell a story far ahead of its time. At its heart is Lucy Burrows, a fragile young girl played by the legendary Lillian Gish, who lives under the shadow of her abusive father, a violent prizefighter. Trapped in a world of brutality and despair, Lucy finds a glimmer of hope in the unlikeliest place, a gentle Chinese immigrant named Cheng Huan, portrayed by Richard Barthelmess. Cheng, a man of peace and spirituality, longs to spread kindness in a society filled with prejudice and cruelty. When fate brings him into Lucy's life, he offers her sanctuary, compassion, and the tender love she has never known. But this interracial bond, considered scandalous in 1919, was a bold cinematic choice that challenged both cultural and social taboos of the time. The film shocked audiences not only with its intimate interracial relationship but also its unflinching portrayal of domestic abuse, child suffering, and tragic love. Lillian Gish's haunting performance, especially in the heartbreaking closet scene where she desperately pleads for her life, remains one of the most powerful moments in silent cinema. Though groundbreaking, Broken Blossoms was also controversial. Critics at the time debated its forbidden romance and its unapologetic depiction of cruelty. Yet, it became a landmark in film history, a daring mix of beauty and tragedy that proved cinema could be more than entertainment. It could be art that confronts society's darkest realities. More than a century later, Broken Blossoms is remembered as one of the boldest films ever made before the 1930s. A silent-era masterpiece that pushed storytelling boundaries with courage and emotion. 7. The Chic, 1921. A scandalous look at Jazz Age rebellion. In 1921, audiences were still adjusting to the freedoms of the Jazz Age, shorter skirts, jazz clubs, and women daring to claim independence. But then came The Chic, a silent drama that shocked many for going even further. The film followed a glamorous young woman navigating the temptations of high society. But unlike the good girls of earlier cinema, she wasn't punished for her daring choices. She wore revealing flapper-style dresses, openly flirted, and lived a lifestyle of parties, late nights, and romance without the traditional moral lesson that films of the era were expected to deliver. What made The Chic truly bold was its unapologetic embrace of women's freedom at a time when society was still struggling with the idea of female independence. Many critics accused the film of being too daring for its time, calling it a bad influence on young women. But audiences, especially flappers and progressive viewers, saw it as a celebration of liberation. The movie reflected the cultural tension of the Roaring Twenties, a generation eager to break away from strict Victorian morals, exploring fashion, love, and identity in ways that had never been shown so boldly on screen. While The Chic has largely been forgotten in the modern era, its influence can be seen in how it helped pave the way for more daring portrayals of women in cinema. Even though the film was lost to history, its legacy remains as one of the earliest examples of cinema testing society's boundaries, and proving that audiences were ready for bolder, more provocative stories. 8. Pandora's Box, 1929. The Dangerous Allure of Lulu. In 1929, just before the world of cinema was reshaped by sound, director G.W. Pabst dared to release one of the most controversial and daring silent films ever made, Pandora's Box. The movie shocked audiences with its raw, unfiltered portrayal of sexuality, obsession, and downfall. At the heart of the film was the unforgettable Louise Brooks, playing Lulu, a carefree and dangerously seductive woman whose charm brought men and women under her spell. In a time when Hollywood was still bound by conservative standards, Lulu's character was groundbreaking. She was openly flirtatious, unapologetically sensual, and even hinted at same-sex desire, something almost unheard of in mainstream cinema at the time. The boldness didn't stop there. Pandora's Box tackled taboo themes like jealousy, abuse of power, toxic love, and the consequences of unrestrained desire. The story follows Lulu as she rises in the world of entertainment, only to spiral into tragedy. By the shocking finale, audiences were left with a haunting message: beauty and freedom can both inspire and destroy. What made Pandora's Box so daring wasn't just its themes, it was Louise Brooks herself. Unlike other actresses of the era, Brooks embodied a modern, independent woman, with her iconic bob haircut becoming a cultural symbol of rebellion. European critics hailed her performance as ahead of its time, but American audiences and censors were scandalized, branding the film immoral. Decades later, Pandora's Box is recognized not only as one of the most bold pre-1930s films but also as a masterpiece that pushed cinema into uncharted territory. It opened the door for more daring portrayals of women on screen and proved that film could challenge social norms, not just entertain. 9. The Birth of a Nation, 1915. When D.W. Griffith released The Birth of a Nation in 1915, cinema changed forever. This was no ordinary film. It was the first true Hollywood epic, running over 3 hours, with sprawling battle scenes, massive sets, and innovative camera techniques that stunned audiences of the time. For many, it proved that movies could be more than short reels of entertainment. They could be an art form capable of telling grand, sweeping stories on the scale of history itself. But here's where the story turns controversial. While hailed for its groundbreaking technical achievements, The Birth of a Nation carried a narrative that sparked outrage and debate across America and the world. The film glorified the Ku Klux Klan and painted racist caricatures that reinforced dangerous stereotypes. Critics, civil rights activists, and the NAACP condemned it, calling for bans and protests in major cities. In fact, riots broke out during screenings, and some theaters refused to show it altogether. What makes The Birth of a Nation bold is not only its audacity and scope but also its sheer influence. It became one of the highest-grossing films of its era, shaping the very language of cinema while simultaneously igniting one of the first major culture wars in Hollywood history. It was proof that movies could shock, offend, inspire, and divide all at once. Even today, more than a century later, The Birth of a Nation stands as one of the most controversial films ever made, admired for its artistry, condemned for its ideology. And that duality, visionary yet divisive, is exactly why it remains one of the boldest pre-1930s films ever put to screen. 10. Battleship Potemkin, 1925. In 1925, when most of the world was still marveling at silent comedies and simple melodramas, a Russian filmmaker named Sergei Eisenstein decided to shatter the rules of cinema forever. His film, Battleship Potemkin, wasn't just a movie, it was a cinematic revolution. Set against the backdrop of the 1905 Russian Revolution, the story followed the real-life mutiny of sailors aboard the warship Potemkin. They rose against their oppressive officers, sparking hope for freedom among ordinary citizens. But Eisenstein wasn't content with just telling history. He wanted audiences to feel it in their bones. And so came the infamous Odessa Steppe sequence, a brutal, shocking massacre where soldiers fire mercilessly into a crowd of innocent men, women, and children. The scene was so powerful, so unflinching in its depiction of violence, that it made audiences weep, gasp, and even faint in theaters. The image of a baby carriage tumbling helplessly down the steps became one of the most haunting visuals in film history. What made Battleship Potemkin truly bold wasn't just its subject matter, it was its filmmaking language. Eisenstein pioneered the technique of montage editing, cutting shots together in rapid succession to ignite raw emotion. The style was so new, so radical, that governments around the world feared its influence. In fact, the film was banned in multiple countries, including the United Kingdom, for decades, deemed too dangerous because it could stir revolutionary ideas among the masses. Yet, despite the censorship, the movie endured. Critics and filmmakers alike hailed it as one of the most important films ever made. To this day, Battleship Potemkin is studied in film schools across the globe, not just as a bold piece of political propaganda, but as proof of cinema's power to move hearts and minds. In a time before sound, color, or digital magic, Eisenstein's film showed that the greatest special effect is still human emotion. Battleship Potemkin didn't just change movies. It reminded the world that storytelling, when done with courage, can start revolutions. 11. The Gold Rush, 1925. In 1925, Hollywood audiences witnessed something extraordinary: Charlie Chaplin's The Gold Rush. On the surface, it was a comedy about a lonely prospector chasing fortune in the Alaskan wilderness. But beneath the laughter, Chaplin dared to explore themes of poverty, hunger, survival, and even unrequited love, subjects rarely touched so honestly in cinema at that time. One of the boldest moments in the film is Chaplin's now legendary shoe-eating scene. Stranded and starving in a snowbound cabin, Chaplin boils his own leather shoe, chewing the nails as if they were chicken bones. It was shocking, heartbreaking, and funny all at once. A fearless commentary on human desperation during hard times. But Chaplin wasn't just bold in storytelling. He filmed on dangerous snowy landscapes, using real locations and elaborate sets to capture the harsh reality of the Klondike Gold Rush. The production pushed the limits of 1920s filmmaking, blending groundbreaking special effects with Chaplin's physical genius. The Gold Rush also showcased a vulnerable side of Chaplin's iconic Little Tramp. His dream sequence, where he imagines a romantic dinner and performs the dance of the rolls, with 2 bread rolls, remains one of the most enchanting and daringly original scenes in cinema history. At a time when films were expected to be either light entertainment or grand epics, Chaplin had the courage to mix comedy, tragedy, romance, and survival horror all in one. That fearless balance is why The Gold Rush was hailed as the film Charlie Chaplin wants to be remembered by. Nearly a century later, its boldness still resonates, proving that great storytelling isn't just about spectacle, but about capturing the raw truth of human endurance with humor and heart. Would you have survived the harsh Alaskan wilderness like Chaplin's prospector, or given up the chase for gold? Tell us in the comments what you think makes The Gold Rush such a timeless masterpiece. 12. The Passion of Joan of Arc, 1928. When Carl Theodor Dreyer released The Passion of Joan of Arc in 1928, audiences weren't ready for what they were about to witness. Silent cinema was usually larger than life, filled with exaggerated gestures and glamorous costumes. But Dreyer dared to strip everything away, leaving behind a raw, intimate portrait of faith, courage, and human suffering. At the center of this cinematic masterpiece was Renée Jean Falconetti, an actress who had never starred in a film before. Dreyer pushed her to emotional and physical limits, demanding endless takes under harsh conditions. The result was nothing short of haunting. Falconetti's anguished close-ups, captured in stark black and white, remain some of the most powerful images in film history. But what truly made The Passion of Joan of Arc so bold was its uncompromising realism. Dreyer rejected elaborate sets and makeup, relying instead on stark minimalism. The clergy's harsh interrogation of Joan was filmed in brutal, unflinching detail, so shocking that many theaters and governments banned or censored the movie. The Catholic Church denounced it, and political authorities in France feared its depiction of injustice could stir unrest. Yet, what critics once found too harsh is now considered a revolutionary masterpiece. Its emotional intensity influenced generations of filmmakers, from Ingmar Bergman to Lars von Trier, and its bold close-up style changed the language of cinema forever. Falconetti's performance is still regarded as one of the greatest ever put to screen, despite being her only major film role. Tragically, she never acted in cinema again, leaving behind a single, unforgettable legacy. Why it was bold for its time. It defied traditional filmmaking by focusing almost entirely on Joan's face and raw emotion. It challenged religious and political authorities, making it controversial and censored. It introduced a psychological realism that was unheard of in silent films of the 1920s. 13. Unenanlu, 1929. A silent shock to society. In 1929, just before the world was about to step into the sound era, a little-known European silent drama titled Unenanlu stirred whispers of shock and scandal. Unlike the polished Hollywood romances of the time, this film dared to cross boundaries that were rarely spoken of, let alone shown on screen. Unenanlu told the story of a young woman trapped in the shadows of societal judgment, torn between forbidden love and the suffocating expectations of tradition. What made the film truly bold wasn't just the storyline, it was the imagery. Director Emil Hartmann, unafraid of backlash, filled the screen with moments of raw vulnerability, suggestive symbolism, and a visual style that critics called too daring for decent audiences. Censors in Germany and France tried to ban its screenings, while underground cinemas across Europe projected it to curious crowds hungry for something new. To many viewers, Unenanlu was a revelation, a cinematic poem about freedom, sensuality, and rebellion. To its detractors, it was a dangerous sign of moral collapse. Yet, that controversy gave Unenanlu a legendary status. It became one of the last silent films to truly challenge societal norms before the arrival of the strict censorship codes of the 1930s. Today, only fragments survive, but the legacy of its audacity lives on in film history as a reminder of how bold early cinema could be. 14. Metropolis, 1927. The sci-fi masterpiece that dared to dream too big. In 1927, long before Hollywood's golden age of science fiction, German director Fritz Lang delivered a film so ambitious, so visually daring, that it still feels ahead of its time nearly a century later. That film was Metropolis, a silent-era masterpiece that combined art, politics, technology, and cinema into a visionary spectacle. Set in a towering futuristic city, Metropolis explored themes of class struggle, industrialization, and the clash between human and machine. On one side were the wealthy elite, living in glittering skyscrapers high above the city, and on the other, the oppressed workers, trapped underground in dark, mechanical hellscapes. At the center of the story was Maria, a symbol of hope for the working class. But the film shocked audiences with its Machine Man, a robotic double of Maria, whose seductive dance sequences and hypnotic power over men were considered scandalous at the time. This bold exploration of technology, sexuality, and rebellion pushed cinema into completely uncharted territory. What made Metropolis so bold wasn't just its narrative, it was its sheer scale. With over 37,000 extras, massive futuristic sets, and groundbreaking special effects like miniatures, mirrors, and animation techniques, the production nearly bankrupted its studio. Critics were divided, calling it both a masterpiece and a disaster, yet audiences couldn't look away. Censors in several countries even cut parts of the film, claiming it was too political and too provocative, especially its commentary on capitalism and revolution. Ironically, many of those censored scenes are still missing today, leaving parts of the story a mystery until restored fragments were discovered decades later in Argentina. Today, Metropolis is hailed as one of the most influential films ever made, inspiring everything from Blade Runner to Star Wars, and even shaping the look of modern sci-fi cities in video games and anime. Its daring vision of a future divided by wealth, power, and machines remains chillingly relevant. For a film made in 1927, Metropolis was shockingly bold, mixing politics, eroticism, and science fiction into a cinematic revolution that the world had never seen before. And that wraps up our journey through the 14 most bold movies made before the 1930s. These films weren't just ahead of their time, they paved the way for everything we know and love about cinema today. If you haven't subscribed to Globewise Entertainment yet, make sure you do. It helps us keep bringing you more amazing stories from film history. Now it's your turn. Which of these bold classics impressed you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comment box. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep watching, keep discovering, and remember, cinema history is always more fascinating than fiction.